My name is Luandile Kogweni, Managing Director of Cara in Johannesburg. Today I will be taking you through the strategic planning process. But before I begin, just to let you know that you're in safe hands. I've been in the industry for the better part of 13 years. The strategic planning process. To start, I think we need to figure out what strategy is and why it's important. Within our ICP planning process, strategy fits into the create phase. Once you've found out as much as you can about the target audience, why they buy the product, what they like about the product, who they are and what media they consume, it is important to put together a strategy for the client. The strategy is a high-level plan that helps you achieve a specific goal. So in developing a strategy, the important thing is to then develop a goal from a media perspective, and thereafter a strategic sequence of events that will enable you to achieve this goal, which would be called the strategy. The key difference between a strategy and a plan is something that is called an intermediate decision and an intra-media decision. The intermediate decision is the big macro goal. It is the bigger thought or the bigger media decision versus the intra-media decision, which is the smaller decision within the various blocks of media. To explain this, an intermediate decision would be specifically looking at what are the big mediums you have to use to achieve your goal, whereas an intra-media decision is looking at specific channels, specific radio stations, and specific types of media that you are to use to build up to that goal. It is important to note that a plan and a strategy work together and are not separate. However, that a strategy is much more high level and a media plan is much more intricate and more detailed in its execution. The basic concepts of strategy are broken down into three. It is the consumer insight, which is an understanding of the consumer that has led you down the road which you're going to. It is an objective that you're trying to achieve through the media strategy. And then it is principles and ideas that will bring that strategy to life. How we develop and put together strategies from a Cara perspective. What we try and do is isolate a challenge which the brand may be experiencing at that given time, because as we know, brands experience different challenges at different times of their life phase. So maybe they're launching and they want to grow awareness, or maybe the brand has been around for a long time and it's losing relevance. So it is key to understand what the exact challenge is at that time to develop a strategy that works best for that brand. The second part is understanding the brand truth, and that is something that doesn't change for the brand at any given time. It is the reason why that brand is created or the reason why that brand exists, whether if it is to help people feel better about themselves or whatever other truth exists about that brand. This is something that you will get from the brand's positioning. The third and most important thing is the consumer insight. A consumer insight is not a fact, but it's something that is derived from a true fact about the consumer. So going on to the next slide, I want to explore this idea of a consumer insight further. A fact might be that teens ask other teens what to buy before they buy. A consumer insight is that teens only trust the advice of their peers. So the one is based on the other one and shows a true understanding of the fact, but not just regurgitating the fact. What an insight will do is enable you to then know how to move forward from a media perspective. Because if teens only hear from other teens, then you need to actually get people through your media to advocate for your brand, to tell other teens that this is a brand that people need to buy. So this gives you a clear objective of what you're trying to do with the media, therefore a clear idea what media to use, which will enable you to engage people and give them enough information for them to speak to their peers and therefore give you good advocacy for your brand. So I'll first start by showing you what a bad example of a strategy is. So from a challenge perspective, it's written here, launch Die Hard 4.0. That's not a challenge, that's an action. That's what we want to do. But the question is, what is the challenge? What is it that we are faced with that we're not normally faced with? In the next example, I will show you what a good example is, where the person explores the actual challenge, not just the action of what we're trying to do, but the challenge in what we are trying to do. From a brand truth perspective, the script says a spectacular action-packed adventure movie. But it's not too descriptive of the actual movie itself. It's very generic and could describe 4 or 5 or 6 different movies, and therefore does not really bring out the truth about that brand specifically itself. From a consumer perspective, consumer insight perspective, they say all young men love thrills and spills, which is true, but the question becomes, what is the insight in that, and what can we take out to then play up in media and be able to get this going more? From a theme perspective, we have a script written, so see the action movie of the year. It doesn't really lend itself to media. It doesn't tell you how you're supposed to use media to talk to these consumers better. Therefore, this theme fails to direct the planner or anybody else to know what to do when they're faced with this problem. From a principal's perspective, it's slightly better because it's exciting young male environments, but it doesn't say what the principles are and what we should constantly be looking at. Going towards a positive example or a good example. From a challenge perspective, we're told, make Bruce Willis relevant to younger audiences. Now this really speaks to a challenge, because yes, we're launching Die Hard 4, but the bigger challenge here is making Bruce Willis relevant again in 2014, because in 1986, when this was launched for the first time, he was very relevant. But in 2014, he might not be relevant. So our challenge is definitely making him as relevant today as he was in 1986. From a brand truth perspective, they say he's an ordinary guy, but an extraordinary man, which speaks true to Die Hard, because unlike a lot of action thrillers, this is not a supernatural human being. It's another human being, same as everybody else, but who just manages through sheer determination to do extraordinary things. So once again, it's very true to that specific movie. And also juxtaposes it against other movies that were launched at the same time. They were more CGI and actually more supernatural and unbelievable. A lot of what happens in Die Hard is believable. A lot of people can see themselves in that script. From a consumer perspective, consumer insight perspective, it talks about how the metrosexual had emerged and how a lot of men were feeling like there wasn't enough masculinity out in the world, and how this movie could be the movie that brings back the heroism of being a masculine man, a man's man, you know, and actually saying there's nothing wrong to bleeding or a scar or two. The theme says, celebrate the return of the real man. It really gives an impression of what we're trying to do. We're trying to put the real man back into highlights and focus. From a principal's perspective, it gives a clear indication what kind of media you're supposed to use. It says heroic in scale. So you know you're supposed to use big media, big out of home, nothing small, nothing diminutive, which speaks once again to the real man or the masculinity. It says moments of male bonding. It tells you what to look for in TV and what to look for in radio when people or men are together in a group, and it's understandable. So like sport or other programs which men would watch as a group. It says masculine environments, which couldn't be any much more clearer. So this brief becomes much more clearer to a planner who takes the strategy and actually implement it on when to plan, where to plan, and what media to use, which ultimately is the only role for strategy. Another example would be a theme which was used by Eurostyle, and really the really good thing about this theme is it says how to use media, as opposed to the last theme, which spoke of a description but was not too clear on how to use media, because at the end of the day we're doing a media strategy. And the theme here is use media in mysterious ways, and talks to a launch that Disney was doing at the time. I won't go to too much explanation, but the idea is about putting together a theme that gives you a true indication of how to use media in your strategy and in your plan becoming much more clear about your strategy. Finally, the culmination of strategy is a combination of three different things: insight and understanding the consumer and the brand, understanding the use of different media channels, how to use different media channels, putting those things together and creating a strategy that works hand in hand, and also exploring new ideas and new channels, because do remember that media is not limited to traditional channels, but could be anything and everything that the consumer can interact with as a touch point throughout their process. Finally, a media strategy is a sequence of events. It's not just one good theme and one good statement of how to use media. It is also understanding how different media types will influence each other and how different media types may be more important at certain times of a brand's life cycle. The brand life cycle is basically as shown on the screen. So the first step is determining what the goal is between awareness, consideration, trial, preference, and loyalty. Often there's more than one objective, so it may be 2 or 3 of these, which will then determine what strategy you use, the insight, and thereafter what the plan looks like. Thank you once again for joining us. That concludes this section of the Dentsu Aegis Network Training Academy. Thank you.